Well, Tony Brown, for a talk show host, you've been unusually well behaved throughout this program, and I thank you for your patience. Do I sound like a white racist to say, see what I mean? You can pull yourselves up by your bootstraps. Does that make you nervous if I say something like that?
No, but the context would make me nervous if you were suggesting, and you're not, that all blacks had to do was to go to work, and if they worked as hard as whites, we could make it. But that's not the context in which you're saying it. The context in which you're saying it is that we are looking at a group of people, 30 million people, who this year will earn $300 billion, equal to the 14th richest nation in the world. We're 12% of the population. We buy 18% of the orange juice, 20% of the rice, 26% of Cadillac cars, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We have 350 black organizations, middle-class blacks, 1 million of which go to white hotels each summer. They spend $16 billion discussing white racism and black poverty. Now, there's no way in the world that white people can free black people, because freedom is not white people's to give. 2, white people, as I said in the piece, cannot do for us what we refuse to do for ourselves. 3, the key to this equation is the behavior of the black middle class. The key to this is not understanding whether or not whites like blacks or blacks like whites. I frankly have no interest in that at all. I have no interest in managed society. I'm not interested in having to sit next to people because they're white. I'm interested in being equal, and the only way you're equal is to have power. Alan Keyes said the most cogent thing said here tonight, and that is, we are talking about power, not whether or not white people have been fair, not whether they're nice people, not whether or not black people are good or bad, but whether or not you as a community of people have the instruments of defense and in some cases of aggression to protect your turf and or your interests. You can't have 30 million people handing over to another people 100% of their resources and blaming them for 100% of their problems. That is not intelligent. So what we need to do in the black community is A, decide to be competitive. And the only way we're going to be competitive is to use our resources. And the final thing I'd like to say is this. The primary resource we have as a people is not our money. It's what we know. And what you know is called human capital. And the fleet of human capital from the black community has been enormous in the name of integration. We've lost our brains to the white community, and nobody is there for the intergenerational transfer of information from middle-class people to poor people, so we now have what we call so-called underclass people.
But if what you know is that critically important, and I don't know anybody who will argue it, how is it possible, in the light of Mr. Kozol's nightmarish and brutally honest and well-researched review of the horror story of public education, especially in the inner cities, for black children to know anything?
White power structure and the white community in America are out of options. They can no longer afford racism, and they can no longer afford school systems that don't work for this following reason. In 8 years, over 50% of the population workforce will be female and non-white. In 30 years, this will be a majority numerically non-white nation. If we do not train women and non-whites to go into the workforce for high-tech skill jobs in the next 8 years, none of us in this room is going to have a job at all. So Mr. Kozol, there's another dimension to what he is saying, and I'm sure he's more than aware of it, and that is, it is not black schools that have failed. The American school system has failed. It is not the ones who drop out that are the problem. The ones who graduate are the problem. We do not have a school system that does anything for post-secondary education, and we don't have a school system that does anything for the bottom 50%, which is why Germany and Japan are beating our brains out.
Regardless of the color of the student.
Regardless. Now, when you get to blacks, we cannot leave out of this equation the black middle class. And we cannot leave out of this equation, no matter what the government does, and the government should do something. We cannot leave out the obligation of the black middle class to transfer its wealth, primary wealth, which is human capital or information, to those in our community who don't have it.
May I ask you're a capitalist with a...
I am not a capitalist, and you said that before. I'm not interested in proving capitalism. I'm interested in using a free market system to alleviate the problems in the black community.
Is capitalist a bad word?
Well, if the way you're using it is though I am trying to prove that this system is better than that system.
No,
I'm not into ideology. You can call me anything you want.
You're a businessman who takes full advantage of the free market opportunities. Let me put it that way.
I'm trying to pay my rent and keep the phone.
Very good.
Now, I don't know what you call that.
Yeah.
Whatever you call
All
that,
right.
that's what I do.
Right.
Now, okay, so I am simply interested in this. There are 30 million of us. We earn $300 billion. We spend 6.6% of our money with one another, 95% with other people. I'm simply interested in creating structures so we can transfer that money back, and most of all, not to any black person in this room, but to poor black people, because the difference in the achievement of our community will not come from middle-class blacks like us who have done so well under affirmative action. Poor blacks didn't get a nickel. They're the ones who are hurting, which is why the black community is in such dire difficulty.
Yes. We're leaving out a lot of things in this story. There are hard-working, good people working in community development corporations, and your emphasis, I like the piece that Tony did, your emphasis on middle-class African-American neighborhoods and the growth of these neighborhoods in cities and in suburbs is something that mustn't be left out of this picture.
Yes.
Otherwise, people aren't going to try.
Your point is made at a time when the middle class is identified with the NAACP, the Urban League, and the traditional We Shall Overcome civil rights leaders of the 50s and 60s that have been all but abandoned and ignored by younger people, Sister Souljah included.
I think that the dice are loaded, and that's what's left out of Mr. Brown's piece. See, there was a period of time in this country after Reconstruction where African people owned a lot of land, owned a lot of businesses, and did a lot of things. But what happened was the American government, the Ku Klux Klans, and other organizations organized in smashing that effort. So it's not that we haven't tried to own lands and have not organized businesses. It's that if you are African in America or in Latin America or in the Caribbean or in the continent, you will be hunted no matter what you do, because they do not want us to survive and become self-sufficient. And you can say no, but you haven't lived this life. You haven't lived this life.
Mayor Kelly's entitled.
Yeah. I think that there's a lot of reason for a lot of our anger, given our history in this country that persists even in 1992. No question about it. But the issue becomes, how do you harness that anger? Do we sit up here and talk about our history, or do we harness that anger to become an empowered community?
You do both.
Now, let me just finish. There's some of us who are struggling right now to empower our communities through educational systems and a whole host of things, trying to shift some capital in the hands of our own community so that when you produce something creative, that the people who have control over the distribution rights are African Americans as against other type of Americans, and that when we go out in this global marketplace, we will be a force with which to be reckoned. We seem to forget, however, that in the midst of all of this, there is a shift that is occurring throughout this whole globe. It isn't just the plight of those of us who are African Americans. Our plight is exacerbated, but we're in a global market. We're dealing with people from all over the world where a market can be taken over overnight by new developing nations. We need to have a better educational system. America's educational system is in a sorry condition. And the worst form of capitalism was perpetuated, espoused in the last decade by a man named Ronald Reagan with "Are you better off today?" Walked away from research and development, walked away from education, walked away from savings, walked away from the capacity for capital formation. The worst form of capitalism was symbolized in the last decade, and that's why we're paying a handsome price. Now, we can sit up and get angry, we can sit up and talk about it, but the question is, what are we going to do about it? And I say, let's start doing something about it now and empower our own community and stop pointing the finger at one another.